First of all, let me start off by saying that this story is from almost 30 years ago when I was a kid. I've told very few people the story, due to not feeling like anyone would believe me. Like a lot of kids in the 90s, I was hanging out over a weekend with a close friend of mine and staying at his house with him and his family. We lived in rural VA, and he lived in a small town like I did. We spent a lot of time riding four-wheelers and exploring the nearby woods that was across a soybean field. One weekend, I was visiting and it snowed an average amount for VA, 4 to 6 inches of so. We were beyond excited to take the four-wheelers out to the field and tear it up a little bit. After we were bored of that, we parked at the edge of the woods and walked in a ways. Now, we had been in this woods quite a bit and had seen a lot of things. There was a lot of old equipment and even old rusted-out cars spread throughout an area of the forest. Being teenagers, we thought this was really cool and would often go check these out. That day we decided that we were going to start building a fort of sorts back near the debris. I often called a small hatchet on me when we were riding trails in case a smaller tree had fallen across the trail. I walked back to the four-wheeler and got it and started to chop down a smaller tree to use as the base of a wall. For the life of me, I could not find another tree of the right size after that one was placed, so I started walking around the area without my friend. It was then that I stumbled upon a rotting deer carcass. This didn't bother me growing up in rural VA. Friends and family were hunters, and I had eaten my fair share of venison in my life. However, I noticed that the deer had what appeared to be claw marks on it. Was this prey for another animal that didn't stick around for its meal? What animals that could catch a deer were even out in this forest? I went to get my friend to show him the carcass. He was as puzzled as me, but we just kind of let it be. I returned to building our fort. As I was using some rope to tie two of the smaller trees together, something caught my eye about 50 yards away. What I saw was just the silhouette of a person. However, it was rounded off and blurry, almost like what you would see in a comic book or video game indicating an unknown character. Startled, I simply yelled, "Hey!" at it. It was then that it darted behind a tree. I'm now acutely aware that we are not alone. I yelled for my friend, and he comes walking over. I let him know what I just saw, and he laughs it off. As he's laughing, I stand up from my squatting position and see this same shadow over his shoulder no more than 10 yards away. I scream, "Oh shit," and immediately take off running for the field as I yell at him to follow. I hear him following me as his footsteps grow closer. Then I hear his footsteps grow farther away. I turn and look, and he has split off onto a different path. At this point, I really didn't care and just kept running as I reached a large ditch that was roughly 5 feet or so deep. I just jumped across it in a panic. I later discovered how far of a jump that was and have no idea how I cleared it. As I reach the field and get out of the woods, I see my friend standing about 30 yards down the line of the woods, hunched over and breathing heavy. I check behind me and see nothing as I start to walk towards him. I ask, "You saw that, right?" To which B responds, "Why do you think I'm out of breath?" We jump on the four-wheelers and head back towards his house, not saying a word. When we get back, I asked him what he saw because I wanted to know if it was the same thing I saw. He described it perfectly. We tried to talk to his parents, but they both just laughed it off and said, "Guess you better stay out of those woods." He had the idea to go talk to his grandmother, who lived a couple blocks away and had lived in town her whole life. We simply asked her if she had ever heard anything strange about the woods over there. She then began to tell us about an old sawmill that had exploded back in her time. She said how much of a tragedy it was at the time and that nearly everyone had lost their life. This explained the old equipment. This explained the old cars rusting out. They had cleaned up parts of the accident, likely the dangerous parts, and left the rest. We then told her our story, to which she smiled and told us how people don't realize that we aren't alone in the world. Absolutely horrified at this point, we left. Neither one of us has ever returned to those woods. My hand axe is still sitting back there. I had terrible dreams for years about this incident and still, 30 years later, have a random dream about the incident. I don't know what we ran into that day, and I'm certainly not going back to check. I lived with my aunt, who lived in a rural city, and I biked to get to work. The route I took to get to/from work was through a very natural woody area that was not very populated, didn't have a lot of streetlights, and was a sort of isolated route in that cars barely drove down that way. And part of the route cuts through a large forested area. One night I was biking home and I got to the wooded part of the route. Before going down the sloped area, I paused to take my phone out and put my earbuds in to listen to music. As I went to take out my phone, the sound of a branch snapping got my attention. I looked up, and only a few feet from me was this tall, pale, bone-thin creature standing off to the side of the trail but still on the sidewalk. It had large black eyes, no nose, and a thin slit for a mouth. Its hands were extremely long and had large clawed fingers, and it was standing in a kind of squatted, semi-crawling posture. Before I could even react to what I was seeing, it let out a loud screech, and at an insane speed, it leapt or moved quickly into the brush, into the denser areas beyond the trail. Hearing the screech sent me into a panic, and my flight response kicked in. I just pedaled as fast as I could through the forested area. The whole time, I could hear large branches and dried leaves being snapped, broken, and the sounds of something large moving through the forest alongside me, as if it were giving chase but not wanting to be seen, if that makes sense. I got through the forest area, which then opened up into a residential kind of area, where there were a few streetlights and homes off in the distance. I wound up stopping underneath a streetlight and looked back at the forest line, and I saw the figure squatted down at the edge of the forest just watching me intently. After catching my breath, I sped back home to my aunt's house, threw my bike in the garage, closed it, and rushed inside, locking every door and window I could. I then ran up to my bedroom, locked the door, and refused to sleep that night. Yes, I know I said I wouldn't tell the full story, but sharing this experience always ends up making me do it anyway. Lol. I did see the creature one other time, a few weeks later in my aunt's backyard, staring up at the window of my bedroom, but I haven't seen it since. I do 100% believe that it was a subterranean cryptid or creature due to its appearance, but also the fact that the area it happened in has a few trails that wind up going underground through some underground tunnels. It just so happened that the city was doing some construction on some of those tunnels and the area of the trail, and I think that the construction had probably caused it to come out to the surface or agitated it enough for it to come out of hiding, and I just happened to be at the right place at the wrong time. I work the night shift driving a taxi in a small town. Most nights are boring, just drunk students or tired workers heading home. But last Friday was different. It was close to 2:45 a.m. when I got a call from dispatch, a pickup request from the old highway outside town. Weird. That road had been closed for years after a landslide. Still, money's money. When I got there, the fog was so thick I could barely see a meter ahead. My headlights caught a figure standing by the roadside, a woman in a dark dress, soaking wet, staring blankly at me. I rolled down the window and asked, "Need a ride?" She nodded once. She didn't say where she was going, just sat silently in the back seat, dripping water onto the floor mats. Her face was hidden by her long hair. I started driving, but the GPS wouldn't load. No signal, no clear destination. The woman simply pointed forward whenever I hesitated. After what felt like hours, we passed the town's edge and headed toward the forest. Finally, my nerves broke. I glanced into the rearview mirror to speak to her and froze. There was no reflection, only the wet imprint of where she sat, slowly soaking deeper into the fabric. I turned around. The back seat was empty. The air smelled like earth and something rotten. Panicking, I slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a stop. Out in the trees, I saw her, standing there, head tilted unnaturally to one side, water pooling around her bare feet. She pointed again. At me. I floored the gas and didn't stop until I reached town. The next morning, the dispatcher called, furious. Said I had ignored 2 more pickup requests from the same location. But when I checked my ride history, there were no requests logged after 2:45 a.m. There was just a note under my profile. Last passenger, undelivered. I haven't driven at night since. But sometimes when I'm parked, my back seat still feels damp. And in my rearview mirror, in the corner of my eye, I swear I see her sometimes. Still waiting.